Hi, I used to write a column for a newspaper in Bangkok called The Nation, back when being a newspaper columnist was a profession, before blogging killed that. And every week I had to come up with a story. And once I married and had children and I got a 9 to 5 job, my life became very routine and mundane, and it became harder and harder to find stories. So once a week, I would take myself to Soy Bangla in Patong Beach to look for stories. And I've always loved the name Soy Bangla, Village of the Donkeys, because that's where the Farang go, Village of the Donkeys. So I'd go down to Soy Bangla, and my ex-wife never complained. She was spending the money that came from the column, and as long as the money came in, she was happy. So I used to go and I'd go down there and park at the corner of Soy Bangla and Songroipi Road. And I'd walk down the street toward the beach and back up the street. And on the way, I would stop into every bar, every restaurant, every business on the way. Since I was in the Lions Club, I knew most of the owners of these businesses, and most of them wanted to appear in my column, and so they would save stories through the week. They'd write them down on cocktail napkins and present me with stories for my column. The best sources were either the Sikh tailors or the photo labs, because a man will tell his tailor absolutely anything. And because the photo labs in those days, tourists used to like to take naked photos of the bar girls. And they didn't want to take that film home to be developed, and so they would develop it on Patong Beach. So there were 6 or 7 photo labs on Soy Bangla. They're all gone now, of course. But back then, they all used to get probably 100 rolls of film a day, and usually it'd be sunsets at Cape Lamprong Thep. But sometimes it would be naked photos of some woman or man. And they would make copies of these and keep them in a shoebox under the counter. And periodically, representatives from the girly magazines in Farangland would come and buy these photos. And so they would let me go through the boxes. And every photo told a story. And that was a gold mine of stories. So I would go down the street, come back up the street, and typically I would get back to my motorcycle at about midnight or 1 in the morning, and the bar stayed open till 2. Now the thing was, at that corner was the Rock Hard Go-Go. And the Rock Hard Go-Go was the largest go-go in Phuket at that time. It was 3 stories. And the first story was pretty typical, the first floor, the ground floor. They played popular music, the girls wore bathing suits, and the disc jockey was Big Bill, who was a legend in those days. He was 400 pounds, he was a veteran, so you got both a bouncer and a DJ and 1 employee. And he had been in Bangkok for 30 years, and he appeared in Trink's column every week. And his wife at some point said, let's get the hell out of the big city, so they came to Phuket. So the first floor was Big Bill's show, and then the second floor was kind of a 60s theme, and the girls wore mini skirts and go-go boots, and the music was Motown. And the third floor was heavy metal and punk, and it was black leather and studs and torn t-shirts held together with safety pins. And that was the floor where, if depending on who was the chief of police in Patong Beach that week, you could pay to dance topless. The bar could pay for the girls to dance topless. And nobody ever danced bottomless on Phuket in those days. There was no nude dancing in those days. So that was about as crazy as it ever got. And there were probably 50 to 75 women working on each of these 3 floors. And the place was run by a pair of Americans named Larry and Karen. And Larry did the office work. Larry was the businessman, and Karen ran the bar. And Karen was an American woman from Minnesota, I think. And she was tall, I think almost 6 feet tall. She always dressed like a Mennonite in long skirts down to her ankles and long frilly blouses with long sleeves, and her collar buttoned up to her neck, and sensible shoes. And she wore this great big fishbowl of white frosted hair, which glowed in the black lights in that bar. And you could always find Karen in the bar, because there would be this glowing white orb moving around the floor. And Karen was sort of a Girl Scout den mother and matchmaker and peacekeeper. She stopped fights, which in any bar are usually going to be between the women. And she helped shy tourists find a girl. And she settled bills and generally ran the joint. And I used to love to sit outside the Rock Hard. Everybody used to give me free coffee and orange juice because I don't drink alcohol. And everybody wanted me to stop and mention their business in my column. And so I knew where all the bathrooms were on Soy Bangla because I drank quarts and quarts of coffee and orange juice every night I did this. So I would stop at the Rock Hard A Go-Go and sit on the street on one of the cafe tables and drink a cup of coffee. And Karen would come out and spend a few minutes talking to me. She never had more than a few minutes to spare. But it was fun to sit there because at 2 o'clock all the bars closed, except across the street from the Rock Hard was the Peppermint Disco. And they paid to stay open an extra hour till 3. So at 2 a.m., if any of the girls at the Rock Hard had not found a date for the night, they would get dressed quickly and rush across the street to the Peppermint Disco and try to get a date for the night. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, there would be this biomass of young women scampering, fluttering across the street like a flock of birds, hungry birds. And that was always fun to watch. So I always enjoyed ending my nights there. And one night I was talking to Karen, and I said, Karen, how did a woman like you ever get in the pimping business? And she said, oh, honey, I've always worked in retail. And that's what it is, isn't it? It's retail. So I was thinking about this today. I was watching a YouTube video on the Irish Times channel, and Pete was interviewing an old farang in Bangkok, a guy who's been there 35 years. And he didn't have anything unique to say. He was a nice enough guy. But, there's probably a couple thousand old farang in Bangkok alone who've been there 35 years. And if you add the provinces in that, I don't know, maybe 5,000 old guys who've been there 30, 35 years. And they all have the same story. I came with a backpack, I taught English, and I'm still here. Yeah. But he said one thing that I found very interesting. He said, I'd been here 10 years before I met my wife. And when I met my wife, that changed everything. That turned my life around. And I'm still with her, and I love her as much today as I did the day I met her. But he said, I'd been here 10 years. I spoke Thai fluently, but she was the first Thai woman I had ever spoken to outside of work who wasn't a bar girl. Well, that's how most guys do it. And it's crazy because, what we're looking for is love. We're not looking for sex. Men tell ourselves that we go to these bars looking for sex and that we're paying for sex. And they like to say, I don't pay a woman for sex, I pay her to leave after sex. Yeah, that's middle school locker room posturing. We seek out women because we know they can fix our lives. We know we're better when we have a woman on our side. We are designed to seek out the company of a woman like iron seeks a magnet. And looking for that in a bar is exactly like going to Kmart and walking up to the cashier at Kmart and saying, will you love me? Will you fix me? Will you save me? It's not going to work. She's not there for that. But it's so easy, isn't it? The women in the bars are immediately available, and they'll tell you anything you want to hear. It's a lot easier to tell a man I love you than it is to do anything else a man will ever ask a woman to do. It's easier than washing dishes, raising babies, working. It's saying I love you is easy. So when I get to Thailand in 3 weeks, when I'm another old man in Thailand, I'll be just as thirsty as anybody else, just as lonely, just as needy, just as desiring of being fixed as anybody else. Am I going to look for it there? I hope not. Listen, I'm going to get to Thailand on May 12th. If on May 13th I can say the only women I've spoken to since I've been here have been bar girls, you have my permission to push me off a patio balcony. Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe.